I just love this time of year. This is buddleia, or butterfly bush, a lot of people call it. This one's not as good as it used to be. It needs, I think, some rejuvenation around the base, some good manure added to it, because it's a bit lackluster, but it's still producing some nice blossoms, and the butterflies go mad on it. But anyway, we are in a period of cool, not that good weather, very, very dry still. The rain we had the other day was a massive help, because I'll show you now. I went up to the buckwheat the other day and had a good look at the hives up there, and there is some honey going into the supers. So the forecast for now is that the weather's going to go much warmer, but with no rain. So you can see here, the sweet clover we get here, little white clover, that's coming out, but only because we've had a little bit of rain, but that will dry up, because when we get temperatures of 24, 25 degrees, which we're supposed to be getting next week and this weekend, it's kind of going to just finish everything off. So the flow historically will finish anyway in about a week, but because it's been so dry, that really is it. I can show you these chestnut fronds here. They're as good as finished now. There's a few still that are, you see a lot on the floor, look. There's a few still that are coming. That there is like a chestnut forming, you see. So that's really it. So I've got a load of queens coming actually tomorrow that I ordered from Italy. So I can make a lot of splits. I'm obviously going to be making a split. I'm going to be caging my queens for a brood break, and also making that split and doing as many as I can. And I'm going to use this opportunity to split the colonies as much as possible. So if I find a colony that hasn't done well and produced much honey and hasn't got much honey on top, in other words, I can use all the bees, not worry about having to put the honey somewhere for now till it's ready, because don't forget it's not going to be cured for a couple of weeks yet at least, but it is dry, so it might be ready sooner. But what I'm going to do is, if I can use a colony, I'm going to split it as much as I can into 2 or 3, because there's plenty of time if you've got mated queens to get ready for the end of the year. And the words I hate saying are end of the season, end of the year, but we are nearly there. So I've just driven the long distance all the way down to the bottom of my garden, not because I can't be bothered to walk, but because I'm going to try and load on some nukes. I'll probably leave the truck here tonight, which is great, I can do that. And I'll be making up some nukes, because obviously to make up nukes you need nuke boxes that are ready. And this is where already we're going to be taking out 3 frames of bees and brood from each colony. We're going to be putting in partitions, and we're going to be putting in the box, in the nuke box, a frame of honey. Now I went into my bottom shed, and immediately I know that the nectar flow is not very good, and I've been kind of in and out of my shed to get different things the last few days, few weeks, and you kind of monitor it as you go. But the pressure on those frames that are in there, the bees are trying to get into the boxes because they know the honey's in there, and that is a sign to me that the nectar flow has been basically rubbish. How much honey have I got from my summer flow? At the moment, there is more than last year, so it's in my interest to get that off as quick as I can. Obviously, as soon as it's ready. So I'm looking maybe to start extracting that in about 3 to 4 weeks. So that'll be ideal. And I think it will be ready early this year, because I don't think the bees have added anything to it since the hot spell we had a week ago. Because I think that's when most of it came in. And I went around and re-supered all my colonies. In other words, checked the supers to see what needed where. And I was surprised I needed to add a few more supers here and there. I probably added another 40 supers to all my 200 colonies. So it's not a massive amount, but it was still better than finding there's loads of room and there's no honey in there. And all the supers I found were really full. So that is a good thing. But it doesn't mean I'm going to have a massive crop. It just means that there is some honey to harvest. But combined with the spring harvest, which was exceptional, and the second spring harvest, remember we had that as well, I'm very happy with the way things have gone. So I'm going into the late summer period with the possibility of harvesting more, and already above, well above last year's harvest, way above it, double already what I got from last year, and the prospect of a few more barrels, fingers crossed. So we're kind of at a bit of crossroads now. As I said, I've had a few days where I've kind of just taken a few, not days off, but got caught up. I've actually had a lot of paperwork to do, as we do in France. I've been looking at material to buy for the new building. I've been working on all of that. So I haven't been doing nothing, but I've just had a chance to kind of just kick back a bit. Went back to the gym this morning with my son, who's now 17, and he can go now when you're 17, providing you get parental permission. And so I'm pretty dead on my feet because something's occurred to me that how out of shape I've got. And as a beekeeper, it's really an interesting thing, and I'd like to do a separate video on it later on about keeping fit as a beekeeper, because there's some key things you really need to do. And the most important thing is maintenance of your back and your upper body muscles, but maintenance of all your muscles, really. You've got to do those stretches. You've got to maintain your muscle mass, and you've got to use a way of lifting that works for you. I kind of happy now in the way I lift my boxes in the apiaries, because I kind of know how to handle things. I've done it so often, and when I lift up from high, I do it a certain way. When I carry heavy supers, I do it a certain way. But if you don't work to a routine and don't work to a recognized way of manual handling, you're going to get injuries, you know. And also the other thing is keeping your apiaries clean. Because if you don't have clean apiaries, that's when you're going to injure yourself, because you might be struggling with the box and you trip over something and you're absolutely screwed, and you only feel it the next day. You can get a sore back, you can get tired, that's normal. And if you're not working hard enough, or I'm just jealous. But there's nothing worse than injuring yourself through a silly reason. In other words, you're not used to it, you're handling it wrong, or you trip over. So that's something you've got to be aware of. So my goal is to lose a large amount of weight and get fit, and obviously somewhere in the middle of that, I'm going to get my honey harvest in. The job of getting these queens into nuke boxes is going to be quite a struggle as well, because it's going to go hot later in the week, which I'm actually quite pleased about, but not hot. Luckily, we're going to get 24s to 26s, which is hot when you're in a bee suit, but not too hot to work if you're organised. So I'll probably be out in the morning, stuff like that. So I've got 50 queens coming tomorrow for me. My ex-colleagues having 50 as well, so it's a lot of queens arriving, but I'm going to bank a lot of them immediately. And I've got a couple of really big colonies here that I kept on purpose. And what I'll do is I'll make a nuke from those colonies with the queen that's in one of those colonies. And I will then put the rest of the queens above a queen excluder, and I'll add extra nurse bees to that colony just to make sure there's lots of nurse bees, and put on a pollen feeder. But there'll be, what I mean is, and put on a pollen patty, so that all those nurse bees in that colony that remain will be able to feed those queens really well. So, and they're only going to hopefully be in there for a week, and then in a week's time I get another 50 come in the post. I'm hoping I'll use them up all in 3 or 4 days, but obviously making up 50 nukes is actually quite a substantial amount of work. It's like, you know, you've got to get all the nukes ready first, and I've got nukes everywhere that I've used for different things that are in different states of mess that you've got to scrape out and clean and find the right frames, put the partitions in, put the foundation in. I've got my foundation made up. There's loads of that in the house, probably another 250 frames. I might have to make some more up at the end of it, but I've got a lot of material all around to bring together to make up my nukes. And the really good thing about making up nukes is you end up tidying up all the boxes you left lying around, because they all get used. Because I've lost quite a few boxes last winter. Maybe not a lot, but I've lost probably 4 or 5, and a couple got broke here and there. A couple got broke last year. You know, all the time there's like pressure on my poly nukes. And the ones that did get damaged by animals last year, I think it was either badgers or pine martens. When the colony had died out, I actually took, if you remember, a load of bees to apiaries in the smart thinking that I wouldn't have to move them later in the year. But what I failed to do was remove any that had died out before the winter. And there wasn't a lot, but there's just 1 or 2 here and there. And those are the ones that were predated. Because if a woodpecker knocks on the side of a colony, basically in most cases the bees come pouring out and shoo it off. And it's the same for a badger, and it's the same for a pine marten. But if they if an animal finds a hive that's dead out and there's loads of honey, they will do whatever they can to get at those honey frames, because it's just a resource and they know it's in there. And once they learn it, they carry on, you know. So excuse the mess, and I will show you this. But this is a couple of boxes that have been eaten out over the winter. There's one there. This is to be dumped now, but just shows you how they gnaw it all. I've got a couple more down here that I've had woodpecker damage. As you can see them already, there they are. They just make a mess of it, you know, completely. So this is my shed where I'm kind of stocking everything, but you can see the bees. I've got some nukes here. The bees are robbiting out, and I know this isn't acceptable. I don't like to see this because it makes it a mess, and also it's not very good sanitary-wise, because all the bees are mixing here and they're feeding off the frames. But that's what I'm coming down to sort out now, and that's why I got my bee suit on, because the frames that are in here, and there's loads of frames inside the shed, are all going to be used. But this is what I mean. This is the woodpecker damage from this year. That's been gnawed by an animal. You know, there's a couple of boxes here that had the same damage. And that, unfortunately, is the nature of the beast. But all these, I've got loads of frames around here, all stored. I can show you, for example, honey everywhere. Beautiful frames of honey that I think I showed you earlier in the season. All things like this can all be used. They're all good. Nothing wrong with that at all. So all my nukes, I've got stacks of them behind me. All these boxes here are all still full of it. So I've got stacks of that to use up. And you can smell it. It's actually, the great thing about the ivy honey from last winter is by the time you get to late summer, if you haven't got any wax moth in it, and you just have to keep a little eye on it, but it doesn't suffer from it that much. By the time you get to late summer, the honey absorbs a lot of moisture. So you can use that really quickly to feed your nuke. So you put a frame in each nuke for a start. And then when you put your queen in, obviously you put a feeder on as well, because it's just logical to give them a feed with a feeder, because it just gives everything that sweetness. I mean, sometimes they don't at all touch the honey in the frame, but it's there, and if they're desperate, they usually will. So we're going to start doing a few nukes, getting a few made up now, and I'll show you what I put inside the nuke box, just so you can have some idea. So I always make my nuke boxes up with approximately 5 frames, and I leave one of these partitions inside the colony, inside the nuke. Okay, so I'm only actually going to be using 5 frames, and this time of year, if we have a really good ivy flow, what I do is I go around and I yank these out during kind of October time and give them another frame of foundation. Just to point out, when you leave your frames of foundation in a warm box, this happens, they get rippled. Okay, look at the difference. You see the difference in the two. One straight, one isn't. That is a problem you get, just bear that in mind. Rippled foundation will mean rippled frames when they're built out. But I'll still use this because this is okay. But this one is probably too far gone now. So I'll probably have to melt that one down as it's so deformed. But you know, it's easier to get out because you can either heat the wires, but often the wax just pops out just like that. Look, you see? It wasn't perhaps put in as good as it should have been. The bees started to build this, but it came out of a hive, it wasn't used. So I'm going to use this when I do that frame's clean now, it doesn't need anything to do apart from a new sheet put in it. So in some respects it's not too much of a problem, but this foundation can be used now. I mean, you could even make a candle out of that. But I'll use it to seal some wax into frames of my Mini Plus. Because I'm going to have to make some frames for Mini Plus up as well, because I've made those Mini Plus I showed you yesterday or the day before. Those are done, but I'm now completely out of frame. So just when I don't need to be, but it is what it is. But anyway, keep your frames somewhere where they're drying out the sunshine, because if they get warped, they look a mess when they're built. So, as I was saying before, if I need to add in a frame in October I can, but I generally work to having 5 frames in the nuke. So inside this nuke, for example, I've got a frame of old comb, nice frame of old comb, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's all clean. You can keep that. That'll be, you know, that'll go. This will go into my hive. Okay. So for my hive that I'm taking the nuke from, it'll have 3 frames. It'll have a frame of foundation. It'll have 2 partitions. And in this colony, so when I come to make up this, I'll make up the hive. This is what goes in the hive: 2 partitions and a frame of foundation. So number 1 slot will have the foundation, number 2 slot will have the partition, and number 10 slot will have the other partition, and that reduces it down to 7 frames. So is that a good thing? Isn't it? I've seen no evidence to say not, and the thing is, they overwinter great on 7 frames because they pack that nest that is there completely full of food. And when we make the nuke, because we're putting the partitions in, it kind of fills the voids of where the bees were with something else, so that there's no kind of loss of bees per cubic centimetre in that colony, okay? That's kind of how I think about it. So we take a nuke, but we put it in this box, and where we've taken the nuke from, the donor hive isn't suddenly kicking around in a big empty box because we've reduced the size of it. And the partitions work really well. Some get a bit chewed. We've got to constantly make a few each year, but we get that kind of thing quite often. I will use that this year, and I'll probably change the foam next spring for another one. We find a few that get that. You've seen the ones. That's what they usually do. That's good, that frame. That means they've accepted that, they've properlised it up, but they don't actually eat it and chew it. So that's fine. But at the end of the process, I'll have a nuke with 5 frames in it and a partition that I can take to somewhere else, and it'll have a queen the next day or the same day. And then I'll release that queen in 2 days, check for queen cells, give it a feed. As you see, we have these little eggs we put on top. I can show you one now. These are the eggs we put on top. It's exactly what we do. Very straightforward. Okay, I gave this a feed the other day. I think they're going to be taking this down. Yeah, some old honey I had, and they are taking it down. Some honey and sugar syrup, and they're taking it down pretty nicely. That's lovely and warm. Let's have a little look at this. Was a virgin queen that I put in, and they've built out really well. So they're just having a feed because there was not much coming in from the outside. There's plenty of pollen coming in, and I put this obviously here is quite sheltered here, but they're all going to have something on top, like a weight of some kind, or the rubber band. And I'll be also minimising the front down, because this time of year we get robber bees, and we get a few wasps starting and a few hornets, and obviously Asian hornets are starting to build as well. But I'm standing in front of another one there. I don't want to be in front of that one. I don't remember seeing bees in there. Well, I forgot about that one. What was that? Let's not have a look now. I don't seem to like my, that wasn't very good. Well, at least my my speaker seems to take the brunt. It was fine. Idiots. So you just forget, you're yapping away. But yeah, the long and the short of it is, it's kind of time to start thinking about robber bees. The flows are finished, how you're going to close up the fronts, and what I do as well, if I can show you one here. So while I'm here, I've got this bit of wood that I use to block off my front of my hives. What this does is like an entrance reducer. So I'll just slide that in there, and I'm actually putting this on now before I put the bees in the nuke, because it means there's less to do, and then all I do is pull out this bit of foam. But all I do is just push that in one side and use my hive tool just to block it off. It doesn't have to be rammed in there. As long as it sits in there and you can get it out, then that means that when I do this, when I bring this box to where it's going to be put, I just pull that out, and then the bees have got their freedom. I sometimes reduce that off even more in times of bad times of problems, but this year at the moment the robbing doesn't look too bad, but it's only really early days. We're only just early July. It's not really until mid-August till you start to see major problems, I find, here. And where we are here, we generally don't have much robbing often, But as I said, you've got to prepare for it and act as though you're going to get it. And if you act as though you're going to get it and prepare for it, you don't kind of get it. So that's my kind of theory on that. But anyway, just to show you, it's an entrance reducer. It's approximately 2/3 of that. So I've got about 4 centimetres left there. That is the doorway now. And it does make a big difference, without a doubt. Less stress on the colonies. You don't just feed one colony or 2 colonies and spill syrup everywhere. Feed the lot. If you spill some syrup, prepare for a mess. Prepare for a lot of bees. Be careful as you put in your syrup in. It's that kind of thing you've got to be so careful of later in the summer, as it creates stress on the colonies and you don't want to have that. I've even got some of my feed ready here. This is some fructose plus syrup that I give to the bees. I've still got a load at the old workshop which I'm going to be bringing back and obviously distributing it around. So I'm kind of organised, but I'm not. I've got everything I need to hand. I just need to put it all together, and that's where the real work and the real time takes. So that's what I'm going to be doing the next couple of days. And if I do leave any hives in the apiaries this winter, they'll be done in these wooden boxes here. Because you can put things on 5 frames over the winter, that's absolutely fine, and they get the protection of the wood. The poly just isn't really good enough over the winter. Just leaves them more vulnerable as far as I'm concerned, especially to woodpeckers, and they're an absolute pain in the backside. Otherwise, you've got to cover all your colonies with wire and stuff like that, and it all becomes very tedious. So I just think, well, I won't give them that chance. I'll go over to wood for the winter if you can. But more so in colonies that are dead. The moral of the story is, pull your finger out and don't leave dead outs in your apiaries over the winter, because they're just a sitting target. This is mountain ash, already dropping berries. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? Get this every year. So the blackbirds are starting to have a go. Look at that, gorgeous. That's a really good tree for food. Produces these wonderful berries, and a lot of birds go nuts on these. It's a good early autumn food, and the flowers in the spring are great as well. And it's not a terrifically vigorous tree, so it never gets out of hand. But I've got quite a few of them around here, one over there, quite a few dotted around. And I think they're absolutely fantastic. If you're ever looking for a small tree to put in a garden and you want something that's going to give it a bit of interest all year round, get something like that. We have also here an ornamental lime, but it's not ornamental, but I say ornamental because it flowers later. So you can see this is in flower still. And a lot of other limes around here are finished, but this is a later flowering one. I actually bought this as a tiny, tiny pot when about probably 15, 16 years ago. It was at a garden centre in Plonquet that was about to close down. And I went in and they were getting rid of a load of stuff, and I was kind of really keen then. And so I teased all the roots out and stuck it in the ground, and it's just gone mad. It just seems to love it here. So from a small, tiny tree to a massive one in about 15 years. So it just shows you how quick things can grow. Anyway, on that note, get organised. Think about making your last splits of the summer, because we're nearly there, unfortunately. Onwards and upwards. Take care. Bye for now.